this is the first time in 500 years, since the Spanish and Portuguese explorers came. It's the first time that Latin America has begun to take its fate into its own hands. I mean, traditionally Latin America had sort of two core problems. One problem was that the states that were established by the conquest were separated from one another. There's very little integration among them. Each state was, there weren't even roads between them. They were quite separated. They were oriented towards the imperial power. Furthermore, there was an internal disintegration. The typical Latin American state has a sector of extreme wealth and privilege, which is sort of European in character, later U.S. in character. They send their children to study abroad. They have the second home on the Riviera. They invest in Zurich. That sort of thing. They're really basic, and they're in fact white often, or more white. That makes a difference. So you have an essentially white, Europeanized elite running the country. A huge mass of misery, oppression, some of the worst in the world, and they're all separated from one another. Well, that's begun. They've begun to overcome that. They're now South American institutions in which they're organized. They're addressing, to some extent, the internal problems. Latin America, say, as distinct from East Asia, Latin America, Latin America has all the reason, has much better basis for development than East Asia did. It has resources, no enemies, no external enemies, everything. But imports to Latin America were luxury goods. Imports to East Asia were capital goods. The East Asian tigers, as they're called, controlled technology, directed investment, and so on. Latin America was just in the hands of foreign investors and domestic elites. They didn't pay any attention to development. All of that is changing. Striking difference is indigenous rights, which you mentioned. There's a huge indigenous population in Latin America. In North America, they were mostly exterminated, but in Latin America, they survived. Not entirely, but substantially. And some countries, like, say, Bolivia, is majority indigenous. Well, they've begun, not for the first time, but for the first time successfully, they've succeeded in taking things over for themselves. In Bolivia, Bolivia is a kind of a model of democracy. It's a country, the elections of the 2000s, the last 10 years, have been won by political organizations which are largely indigenous. And the president is somebody who comes out of their own ranks. Not some rich guy, but poor peasant, Evo Morales. And the elections they're not circuses like in the United States. They're on serious issues, resource control, cultural rights, which are quite complex in these kind of multicultural societies, women's rights, and so on. Major big issues that people are engaged in, and they've achieved a lot. By now, in fact, one achievement is that the U.S. has been thrown out of every one of its military bases in South America. None left, There was a new organization formed about a year ago, so it hasn't done much, but it may. It's an organization of the Western Hemisphere states, excluding the United States and Canada. That's pretty important. That means, we're not going to be playthings in the hands of the rich white Northerners. Those are major achievements. There's plenty of things wrong, but quite significant achievements.